She was told she'd never amount to anything, that her dreams were too big, too bold, too impossible for someone like her, a black girl with nothing but her voice and unshakable belief. But they were wrong. Now, with a Grammy in her hand, she stands as proof that nothing is too big to conquer. Witness her rise, and feel the storm of strength that will leave you breathless. Subscribe now to follow this journey from doubt to triumph. You won't want to miss a single step of this history being made. The fluorescent lights of the classroom flickered overhead as Maya sat in the back row, her dark skin glowing softly against the dull blue of her school uniform. Her fingers drummed quietly on the desk, a nervous rhythm, a pulse that matched the quickening of her heartbeat. She had been waiting for this moment for weeks, the decision she would make, the dream she would voice aloud. When Mrs. Walker called on her, she felt the eyes of her classmates on her, the weight of their expectations pressing down on her like 1,000 unseen hands. "Maya, do you have anything to share with the class?" Mrs. Walker asked, her voice sharp as always, like the tip of a blade. The class was waiting, their eyes flickering with a mix of boredom and curiosity, but Maya had something else on her mind, something that made her feel alive in a way nothing else could. She cleared her throat, her hand shaking slightly as she looked up at the teacher. "I want to join the choir," she said, her voice small but steady. The words fell out of her mouth before she could think twice, and for a brief moment, everything in the room seemed to freeze. There was a beat of silence, the kind that happens when something unexpected is said aloud, when the air becomes thick with disbelief. Mrs. Walker's lips twitched into a smile that wasn't kind. "The choir, Maya? Are you sure about that? You singing?" The way she said it felt like an insult, as if Maya had just declared she wanted to become an astronaut without knowing how to read. Her classmates snickered under their breath, and a few of them exchanged glances, shaking their heads as if Maya had asked to join a circus. Maya felt the heat rise to her face, the sting of their mockery settling deep in her chest. I think I have a good voice," she said, almost apologetically, the words feeling foreign and fragile on her tongue. Mrs. Walker didn't even attempt to hide the sarcasm in her tone. "Maya, you're not exactly cut out for singing, are you? I mean, you can barely carry a tune in the classroom, let alone in front of an audience. Maybe you should stick to something more realistic." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp, slicing through her like a blade. It felt like the entire room was laughing at her, not with her, their eyes full of something she couldn't quite place, mockery, maybe, or pity. She didn't know which was worse. She shrunk in her seat, wishing for the earth to swallow her whole. Mrs. Walker turned back to the lesson as if nothing had happened, and the class carried on as usual, but Maya felt a lingering sense of humiliation, a weight that pressed down on her shoulders and made her want to disappear. The next few days were a blur. She went to school, her mind constantly racing, her thoughts haunted by the words her teacher had said, by the laughter that had followed. But something in her refused to give up. She wasn't going to let them take this dream from her. She practiced in secret, in the quiet of her room at night, with her headphones on, singing along to the music that spoke to her soul. Her voice was rough at first, unsure, but there was something there, something raw and powerful that she could feel deep in her bones. She didn't care if Mrs. Walker or anyone else believed in her. She was going to make this happen somehow. And she did. Every day she sang. She sang until her voice grew stronger, until the notes she once struggled to reach came effortlessly, until the rhythm of her soul became one with the beat of the music. When the auditions for the choir came around, she stood in line, heart pounding in her chest, but this time there was no doubt. She was ready. She walked into the room with a quiet confidence, her voice clear and sure as she sang, her eyes closed, lost in the melody. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, Mrs. Harris, the choir director, looked at her with an unreadable expression. "Maya," she said slowly, "I'm impressed. You have a good voice. We'll be happy to have you." Those words, the one she'd longed to hear for so long, filled her with a joy she couldn't explain. She was in. She had made it. But even as she smiled, she knew the road ahead would not be easy. The other kids in the choir didn't look at her with the same warmth they gave the others. They made jokes about her, whispered behind her back, and treated her like she was some sort of charity case. The other girls had the polished voices, the clear tones that sounded like angels singing. Maya had grit, she had soul, but they couldn't see that. They didn't understand that the strength of her voice came not from the perfection of the notes, but from the raw emotion behind them. But she kept singing. She kept practicing, even when the cruelty of the world seemed unbearable. And with each performance, her voice grew stronger, her presence more commanding. The world began to notice her, and with that, her fame began to rise. It wasn't instant, but slowly, steadily Maya's name became one to be reckoned with. She dropped her first album at 19, and it was like the world had finally heard her. Her songs were anthems, and her voice, flawed but powerful, captivated millions. She sang of pain, of love, of survival. Her music was the sound of her soul being set free. The first time she won a Grammy, she stood on stage, holding the golden trophy in her hand, her heart racing with disbelief. She looked out at the audience, their faces blurry with tears, their applause deafening in her ears. But there, in the crowd, she saw them. Her teachers. Mrs. Walker, sitting in the front row, her face frozen in a mask of shock. Mrs. Harris, clapping along with everyone else, her smile a little too wide, as if trying to convince herself she had known all along that Maya had it in her. The sting of those early years came rushing back in that moment, but Maya stood tall, holding her Grammy up high. She didn't need to say anything. The microphone was silent in her hand. The music spoke for her. But the moment that truly broke through the facade of everything she had overcome came years later, when she returned to her old high school, this time not as a student, but as a star. She was there to perform, invited back to the school assembly, the entire gymnasium packed with eager faces. The buzz in the air was palpable, the anticipation electric. Maya took the stage, her eyes scanning the crowd, and she saw them, her old classmates, some grown into their own lives, some still stuck in the past. But it was the teachers she noticed most. Mrs. Walker was sitting front and center, her arms crossed, her face impassive. Mrs. Harris was there too, standing in the back with a smile that seemed a little too forced, a little too rehearsed. Maya began to sing, her voice soaring through the gym, filling every corner, every crevice of the room. She sang with everything she had, with all the anger, the hurt, the triumph that had built up inside her over the years. Her voice was no longer a fragile thing, but a weapon, a force of nature. When the last note lingered in the air, Maya let the silence stretch. She stood there, breathing heavily, her eyes locked with Mrs. Walker's. The teacher didn't move. She didn't clap. She didn't acknowledge the power of what Maya had just done. But Maya didn't need her approval anymore. She had proved everything she needed to prove. The applause that followed was deafening, but Maya's heart was calm. As the crowd erupted around her, she caught a glimpse of Mrs. Walker's face, a mixture of disbelief and something else. Regret, maybe? Or guilt. It didn't matter. She had one. She had done it. The world was hers, and she would never let anyone tell her she wasn't cut out for something ever again. The lights above her seemed to pulse in rhythm with the pounding of her heart. Maya stood still on stage, the last note of her song hanging in the air like a prayer, as if the music had woven itself into the very fabric of the room. The applause was deafening, but for a moment, all she could hear was the steady thrum of her own pulse. The world around her seemed to blur, the faces in the crowd melting into one endless sea of blurred outlines. Her breath caught in her throat, the taste of victory sweet yet bitter. She had done it. She had come back, and her voice had shattered every doubt, every sneer, every whisper. The echo of her song seemed to linger, as if the walls themselves were vibrating with the power of her triumph. She looked out across the gymnasium, her eyes sweeping over the sea of faces, young and old, familiar and unfamiliar. They were all here to witness her success, her rebirth. But in the front row, she saw them, her former teachers, the ones who had doubted her, the ones who had laughed at her, who had crushed her spirit when she was just a girl with a dream. Mrs. Walker's face was unreadable, her lips pressed tightly together, her arms crossed defensively over her chest as though trying to shield herself from the weight of Maya's gaze. And then there was Mrs. Harris, standing a little too far back, clapping just a little too enthusiastically, as though her applause was meant to cover up something she couldn't quite admit, perhaps the guilt she carried for not seeing Maya's potential when she had been so close to it. The realization hit Maya like a jolt of electricity. It didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. She didn't need them. She didn't need anyone's validation but her own. She was standing on the stage she had once only dreamed of, and she had earned it through nothing but her own willpower, her own resilience. A wave of nostalgia crashed over her as she looked at her old high school. The walls of this gym had once felt like a cage, confining her within the narrow expectations others had placed on her. But now, standing here, she realized the cage had always been an illusion, a product of her own fear. She was free. As she took in the roar of the crowd, the flood of adoration, she could still see the echoes of the girl she used to be, the shy teenager who had once sat in the back of the classroom, her dreams dismissed before they could even fully take shape. That girl had been uncertain, had believed the lies people told her about who she was, about what she could achieve. But that girl was gone, replaced by the woman who had fought for every inch of her success. Maya's gaze returned to Mrs. Walker, who still refused to move, her face stiff with what could only be described as pride, but not the kind that came with genuine admiration. It was the pride of someone who had been proven wrong but couldn't admit it. Maya felt a twinge of something sharp, something like bitterness, but she didn't allow it to linger. She didn't need to explain herself to anyone. She wasn't here for their approval anymore. She was here for herself, for the girl who had stood in front of them all those years ago, trembling in the face of their doubt, and had refused to give up. That was the victory. Not the Grammy, not the fame, not the adoration of millions. The victory was that she had stayed true to herself when the world tried to tear her down. And as she stood on the stage, the applause still reverberating in her ears, she felt a quiet strength, a certainty that had eluded her in the past. It wasn't about showing them what she could do. It was about proving to herself that she had always known who she was. The music had never been about anyone else. It had always been about her. The sound of the crowd, the warmth of their applause, felt distant now, like a wave crashing on the shore, then retreating back into the ocean. She was no longer part of that world. She had transcended it, rising above the ridicule, the judgment, the doubt. She was free. Free to create, free to live. The lights dimmed, the noise softened, and in that stillness, Maya walked to the edge of the stage, her eyes locking with Mrs. Walker's. There was a moment, a brief flicker of something unspoken between them, and for the first time, Maya didn't feel the need to explain herself. She simply smiled, the kind of smile that came from a place of deep knowing, a smile that was both triumphant and sad. Mrs. Walker's expression faltered, just for a moment. She wasn't sure what to make of it. Was it guilt? Regret? Or just the recognition that this was a girl she had underestimated? That she had failed to see what was so clear now? Maya didn't care. She turned away, her back to the woman who had once tried to squash her dreams, and walked off the stage. She felt the weight of the applause, the cheers, but they no longer mattered. What mattered was that she had done it, had made it to the other side, had carved her own path where others had seen only obstacles. She had been broken, but she was no longer fragile. The crowd was still roaring, but she was already walking down the hallway, past the lockers she had once passed by with her head down, past the classrooms where she had tried to shrink into herself. She was no longer the girl. She was something more now. She was a force. The world might have doubted her, but now they were the ones who had to reckon with her. The road ahead would be long, and she knew there would still be challenges, still moments of doubt and fear. But she had learned one thing. She could survive anything. She had survived them all. Maya stepped outside the building, breathing in the cool night air, the quiet of the world around her settling like a blanket. The stars above seemed closer, somehow, as if they were watching her, acknowledging her journey. The weight of everything, her struggles, her triumphs, her pain, her victory, seemed to lift, and in that moment, she felt a strange peace. She had made it. She was here. The world had no choice but to listen. And as the night stretched on, Maya knew this was only the beginning. There would be more songs, more victories, more moments of doubt to overcome. But she was ready. Ready to face whatever came next, knowing that no matter what, she would always have her music, her voice, and the truth of who she was, someone who had been told she couldn't, and had shown them all exactly how wrong they were. The cool night air wrapped around Maya like a silken shroud as she left the school grounds, the echoes of the roaring crowd still pulsing in her veins, the taste of bittersweet triumph lingering on her tongue as memories of those long, painful days in the back of a cold, dismissive classroom melded with the exhilarating rush of her newfound freedom. Every step she took was a defiant drumbeat in the symphony of her life, a declaration that she was no longer bound by the limitations imposed on her by a world that had once tried to silence her. In the solitude of the midnight street, the city lights blurred into a cascade of colors, each one a reminder of the myriad voices that had once told her she wasn't enough, voices that now faded into insignificance against the mighty crescendo of her own resolute heartbeat. Her mind wandered back to the countless nights spent in the quiet of her room, when she poured every ounce of her pain, every spark of hope, into her music, turning whispered dreams into a force that could not be contained, a storm of passion that surged through her like a tidal wave of defiance. Each note, each lyric, was a thread in the tapestry of her soul, intricately woven with the threads of struggle and the shimmering strands of eventual victory. As she moved through the deserted streets, the cityscape around her felt transformed, no longer a cold and indifferent metropolis, but a living canvas on which her dreams were painted in bold, unyielding strokes. The rhythm of traffic, the distant hum of life, even the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, all conspired to remind her that the world was full of infinite possibilities waiting to be claimed by those brave enough to dream. In that moment, the memory of Mrs. Walker's sneer and the biting cruelty of her former teacher seemed almost like distant echoes, relics of a past that no longer held sway over the woman she had become. Their words, once like shackles, now crumbled under the weight of her undeniable truth, each scornful remark fueling the fire that propelled her forward into a future where her voice was both her sanctuary and her battle cry. With every step, Maya embraced the paradox of her journey, a haunting beauty mingled with the scars of her past, a bittersweet cadence that reminded her that triumph was born not from the absence of pain, but from the courage to rise above it. The city, with its sprawling tapestry of light and shadow, became a metaphor for her own existence, a realm where even the darkest alleys could lead to radiant breakthroughs, if only one dared to venture into them. As she approached a small, tucked-away cafe that had once served as her refuge during long, solitary nights of practice, she paused to reflect on the enormity of her transformation, a metamorphosis that had not only reshaped her destiny, but had also redefined the very essence of who she was. The shy, tentative girl who had once been silenced by the weight of others' expectations was now a force of nature, her voice an instrument of liberation that could shatter preconceptions and rewrite the narrative of her life. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, stretching out like the remnants of old doubts that were slowly being left behind, and as she stepped inside the warm, inviting glow of the cafe, she felt the stirrings of new inspiration, a spark that ignited visions of future stages, future songs, future battles to be fought and won. Every face in the room, every soft murmur of conversation, was a silent witness to the profound journey she had embarked upon, a journey that had taken her from the margins of scorn to the epicenter of a musical revolution, where every chord she struck resonated with the echoes of those who had once doubted her. In that tender yet tumultuous interlude between what had been and what was yet to come, Maya allowed herself a moment of quiet introspection, a brief pause to savor the realization that she was not merely a survivor of her past, but a creator of a future where her voice would forever ring out as a clarion call for those who had been silenced. The memory of every sneer, every dismissive glance, now served as a testament to her resilience, a reminder that the very obstacles meant to confine her had instead become the catalysts for her soaring ascent into realms where the impossible yielded to the might of unwavering determination. With a renewed sense of purpose pulsing through her, she returned to the city's vibrant heartbeat, each step carrying her further into a night alive with possibility, each breath a vow that she would never let the ghosts of her past dim the brilliance of the light she now carried within her soul, a light that was destined to illuminate not only her own path, but also the paths of countless others who, like her, had once been told they were not enough. Maya stood in the shadow of the world she had created, the weight of everything she had overcome settling on her shoulders like a crown, both heavy and resplendent. The road that had once seemed impossibly long now stretched behind her in a tapestry of memories, each note, each lyric, each step a chapter in a story that only she could tell. She had risen from the ashes of rejection, from the unrelenting mockery of her teachers, from the cold, indifferent voices that had tried to crush her spirit. They had underestimated her, had thought her ambition nothing more than a fragile fantasy, and yet here she was, undeniable, unstoppable, her name etched into the annals of history like the name of a warrior who had fought battles no one knew about, battles fought not in arenas or on stages, but in the quiet of her heart, in the depths of her soul. The city that had once seemed so distant and unattainable was now hers, its lights reflecting the glimmering stars of her own making, each beam a testament to the power of perseverance, to the strength of someone who had been told they would never succeed, who had been told they were not cut out for greatness. And yet here she was, not just surviving, but thriving, her music a tidal wave that had swept across the world, drowning out the voices of doubt and replacing them with the raw, undiluted truth of who she was. She had built her empire, piece by piece, note by note, melody by melody, until she had become more than just a star. She had become a symbol of what it meant to fight for your dreams when the world tried to tell you to stay down. Her journey had not been easy. It had been fraught with pain, with moments of self-doubt, with the relentless whispers of a world that had no place for someone like her. But with each battle she had faced, she had come out stronger, more determined, more certain of the power that lay dormant within her, waiting to be unleashed. She had never needed anyone's permission to succeed. She had never needed anyone's approval. And that, perhaps, was her greatest triumph. She had learned to trust herself when everyone else had turned their backs. But as her fame grew, as the world's adoration of her music reached heights she had once only dreamed of, something began to stir within her, something she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't a feeling of pride, not exactly. It was something deeper, something more primal, an overwhelming sense of purpose, a need to return to where it all began. To return to the place where she had been told she would never amount to anything, where her dreams had been mocked, where she had first stood up in front of the classroom and declared her desire to be more than the world thought she could be. And so, it was in the silence of an autumn evening, under the weight of a sky full of stars, that Maya made the decision to return. To return not just as a celebrity, but as someone who had come full circle, who had seen the world and conquered it, but who knew the only way to truly heal was to confront the ghosts of her past. She would go back to her old high school, not to gloat or to show off, but to stand before the people who had once dismissed her, to let them see her for who she had become, not the girl they had ridiculed, but the woman who had proven them all wrong. The night before she left, she sat in her apartment, the city lights sprawling before her like a sea of endless possibilities, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the weight of the journey, the years of struggle, the nights spent doubting her worth, the moments when she had wanted to quit but refused to. She had done it. She had become the thing they had told her she would never be. She had become more. And now, it was time to face the past. When she arrived at the school the next morning, the air was thick with the familiar scent of old books and freshly polished floors, the same scent that had clung to her memories for so long, the same scent that had once made her feel so small, so insignificant. As she walked through the halls, the echoes of the past followed her, whispers of the girl who had sat at the back of the class, who had been mocked for daring to dream. But now, as she stood in those same hallways, the echoes were different. They no longer spoke of ridicule or doubt. They spoke of strength, of resilience, of the incredible journey she had undertaken to arrive here. She passed the classrooms where she had once struggled to be heard, where the sharp voices of her teachers had tried to silence her, and now she saw the empty desks, the faded chalkboards, the classrooms that once felt like prisons. Now, they were just rooms, places where the stories of her past had been written, places that no longer held power over her. She was free. She entered the auditorium, where the final echoes of her music had barely faded from the night before. It was quieter now, the seats empty, the stage lit only by the soft glow of the lights. But in her mind, the applause still rang in her ears, still vibrated in her bones. The memories of the girl who had once stood at the back of the classroom, trembling in the face of judgment, seemed distant now, like a past life. And yet, there was a part of her that couldn't help but look back, not with resentment, but with a sense of something that bordered on gratitude. The pain she had felt had shaped her, had forged her into the person she was now. Without it, she wouldn't have become the force that stood before this stage today. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. But the world needed to see what was possible when you refused to give up, when you refused to let the voices of the past dictate your future. As she stood at the edge of the stage, Maya felt a deep, unwavering sense of closure. She had returned to confront her past, to face those who had doubted her, to remind them that the girl they had ridiculed was now a woman who had achieved everything they had said was impossible. And as she looked out at the empty auditorium, she knew that in this moment, she was both the beginning and the end. The story that had begun in the halls of this school was coming full circle, and in the silence of that space, she allowed herself a small, private smile. She had done it. She had become exactly who she was meant to be. As Maya stood in the hushed auditorium, the air thick with memories that swirled around her like the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, she felt the gravity of this moment, the moment she had never truly expected to reach. The quiet space before her seemed to pulse with an energy she had come to understand intimately over the years, the energy of doubt, of rejection, of longing, and of triumph. This was the same stage where years ago, her dreams had been laughed at, her voice dismissed as insignificant, and yet, here she was, standing tall and unbroken, having turned that very same rejection into her strength. The stillness in the auditorium enveloped her, as if the world itself held its breath, watching her, knowing that this moment was not just hers, but theirs, their collective past, their shared pain, their collective disbelief that had one day turned into awe, and perhaps even shame. She could feel it now, an almost palpable tension between the girl who had once been ashamed of her dreams and the woman who had mastered them. Maya walked across the stage slowly, each step deliberate, each footfall a mark of a long, difficult journey. She could almost hear the whispers again, the ones that had once told her she was too much and never enough. But now, those whispers were faded, distorted by the vastness of the success she had achieved. She had drowned them out with her music, with the clarity of her own truth. As she reached the center of the stage, she closed her eyes, the weight of the past and the present pressing against her chest. The years of silence, of sitting at the back of classrooms, of watching others chase their dreams while hers were laughed at, were not erased, but they had been transformed. The woman who stood here now wasn't defined by what others thought of her, but by the voice that had grown stronger, louder, and more unapologetic with every battle she fought. And now, standing here in the place where it had all started, She was ready to let go of whatever remained of the past that still lingered in her heart. She didn't need closure. She had already closed the door years ago. But standing in the heart of this empty auditorium, she could feel the weight of it all, the absence of the people who had once doubted her, the hollow echo of their absence in the space where they once stood, their cold disbelief now replaced with the absence of words, as though even they knew that she had done what they had never believed possible. Maya opened her eyes, scanning the room with a quiet intensity, her gaze settling on the empty seats where she once imagined herself invisible. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She wasn't invisible now. She never had been. She had been watching, quietly, biding her time, and now the world was hers for the taking. She didn't need them to acknowledge her. She didn't need them to clap. She didn't need any more validation. The applause she heard now, the roaring crowds that cheered her name, the Grammy on her mantle, were all echoes of her own journey, not theirs. But for a fleeting moment, she wished they could see her now, not the image of success that was projected to the world, but the woman who had fought so desperately to become whole, to become her own savior in a world that had repeatedly tried to drown her voice. She turned toward the door, a sudden quiet flood of emotion sweeping over her like a storm breaking in the distance. It was a strange feeling, one of both liberation and sorrow, of an overwhelming gratitude for her own strength, but also a quiet mourning for the girl who had once felt so small, so insignificant, and had never known if she would make it out of the dark. And yet, here she was, standing on this stage, no longer the girl who feared the whispers, but the woman whose voice now filled the world with a thunderous roar. Her past had shaped her, but it would not define her. Her future was hers to claim, not as a victim of circumstance, but as a conqueror of it. As she stood in the center of the stage, she imagined them all, those teachers, those classmates, who had whispered behind her back, who had believed that she could never make it, and she understood something profound. They weren't the ones who had held her back. She had held herself back, her fear, her insecurity, her doubt. It had never been them. They had only reflected back the doubts she had already believed about herself. And now, here she was, a reflection of something entirely different. A woman who had embraced her own power, her own voice, who had taken the doubts they had placed upon her and turned them into the fuel for her fire. She would never forget them. She would never forget the way they tried to break her. But she also realized that they were a part of her story, one chapter among many, and not the defining one. The defining chapter was the one she was living now, the one where she stood alone in a room of echoes, her heart full of music, her soul full of fire. Maya walked toward the edge of the stage, her footsteps ringing out in the empty space, and for a moment, she thought of the girl she had once been. The girl who had felt small, who had cried in the darkness of her bedroom, who had believed that her dreams were impossible, that they were too big, too loud, too unworthy of the world's attention. She wanted to speak to her, to say, "You did it. You made it. You were always enough. You are everything." But instead, she said nothing. Because in the silence, in the profound stillness of this moment, she understood that the words had already been said. She had already proven it. She had already told her own story through the songs she sang, the stages she had graced, and the people whose lives she had touched. She had become the story of resilience, of overcoming, of becoming. And that, more than anything, was the final chapter, the one she had written herself, with the ink of every tear, every triumph, every setback, and every victory. She didn't need to go back to them. She didn't need to confront her past anymore. She had already conquered it. She turned her back on the stage, her heart light and full of purpose, and walked away, knowing that the echoes of the past would follow her, but they would no longer define her. She was free. She was ready. And nothing, no one, would ever tell her she couldn't dream again. The end was only another beginning, and as the doors of the auditorium closed behind her, Maya stepped out into the night, her future unfolding before her like an infinite sky, her voice soaring higher than ever before.